Alex Jafari with Irfan going over the homework problem from Chapter 3, Section 4, which we learned on regarding equals method and just comparing the objects attribute by attribute. So as you remember, Irfan, the homework problem was about the ants Olympics. It was going really well, and each athlete was going to swim through the container of salt. And if they made it out alive, they would get a medal. Clive, the ant, gave up after much struggle and lost himself, and also his mind a little bit. So he started to get philosophical about if all the salt grains are the same or different. Some looked bigger, some were heavier, and some were different colors. So we wanted to design a method that compares two salt grains and decides whether they're effectively the same. So I have here your code, Irfan, in the main class, and you also have a salt grain class where you went through this homework problem, and we're gonna review it together. Are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Excellent. So here you have created 3 examples of salts, and then you just have a print line of saying whether or not 2 salts are the same. So let's see how you have first created a salt. So a salt grain has a size, a weight, and a color. Now, first thing I have here, what makes a great programmer instead of just a mediocre programmer?
Yes, I should have written the comments.
Yes, exactly. So I have no idea what size means. What is size here?
I meant height by size.
Oh, you meant height. Okay, so that's definitely different. You should have renamed it to height. And then what unit of measurements are you using?
Let's say centimeters.
Centimeters. Okay. And that's why you have it as a double?
It could be as a double in centimeters.
Okay. So if you meant height, what if two salt grains have the same height, but one is wider than the other?
Um, doesn't it show on the weight part?
Not necessarily.
So what other attributes do you think
So
we
the
should
size could either be like the volume, or we could have added height and weight. But because the weight is very, very, like, I don't know if it'll show up in the weight if it's just a little bit wider. But for the time being, we can keep it as a height, but we should definitely rename it. So here you can just right click and rename. We're going to rename it to height, and it will rename it throughout the code. All right, what about weight? What is this?
It should be in grams, I think.
Okay, and it's a double again?
It could be a double.
Okay, so in grams. All right, and you just have color as a string. Okay, so you have your constructor, which is your standard boilerplate constructor, and then you have your equals method, which, okay, so you're missing one thing. What's the thing that you're missing on this method?
So, since it's equals, it's true or false. So I started by Boolean equals.
What's the first thing that we do when we are writing a new method? In the
We
design
make an
lesson?
example.
No, the first thing that we do.
Signature.
Purpose statement, right?
Yes.
That's the one that's missing here. So what's the purpose statement up here?
Check if two salt grains are the same.
If all the attributes of this salt grain is the same as the given other salt grain. So you're saying, okay, check if it's the height is the same, and if it's the weight the same, and if the color is the same. Why did you use 2 equals here and an equals method for this one?
Yes, the third one shouldn't be a dot now that I'm seeing. It should be 2 equal signs.
You're saying it should be like this? Is that what you're saying?
The parentheses can go on the other side.
What do you mean go on the other side? You mean you can remove the parentheses?
Yes.
Okay. Are you sure?
I think so.
Okay. So it sounds like you may have copied this code from somewhere else, and now that I'm asking about it, you're not sure. So the way you had it is actually correct, and this is why. You have 2 equals to compare numbers. So primitive things like doubles, integers, these things that just come in with Java's, primitive types, you compare them with equals, like 2 equals like this. The color is a string. And as you can see, as we've talked about it, string itself is a class, actually. That's why it's capitalized. String is a class. So in order to compare 2 strings, you need to use the dot equals method. This is similar to how we are now saying salt grain here, because it's 2 classes. So to kind of summarize, when you're comparing 2 numbers, you use 2 equals like this. When you're comparing 2 classes, you need to use a dot equals method. Does that make sense?
Okay, it makes sense, yes.
Okay, be careful. This is why we love documentation and not ChatGPT as much, because ChatGPT sometimes gives an answer and it doesn't really fully give the explanation. Versus if you look at the documentation, it'll be easier to understand. Okay, so we have the dot equals method here. We have our examples are given here. So you have a salt grain that is of height 1.5, O2 with the color white, and the other salt grain is essentially exactly the same. And then the third one is different. So you want your first 2 to be the same, and your 1 and 3 to be different. So
To be false.
Yeah. So you should actually be, should either be saying are they different, or this could be false. All right, so these are your examples, and you have the code. What's the last step?
Testing?
Testing, exactly. So we want to test this method. So the way we can do this, we have a test person class, but let's create a new file. Hopefully this works. We want to test saltgrain.java. I'm going to copy this over. Test saltgrain. And I'm going to convert your examples as test cases. So these 3, I'm going to copy them over here. Delete everything. Whee. And then I'm going to say assert true that grain 1 dot equals grain 2, this should be true, right?
Right, yes.
Excellent. And then the last thing is assert false that grain 1 is equals to grain 3, right?
Exactly.
This is the same as writing assert equals grain 1 dot equals grain 3 is going to return false. These two are the same, but assert false is just like cleaner, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. Okay, I think we need to... Okay, let's run this. They all passed.
Yay.
Yes, excellent. Just to make sure that, if it doesn't pass, we can see. I'm just going to change this to true. We're going to run it again. Oh, this is running main, sorry. We're going to run the tests again. So that's why we know this is failing. So it should actually
Testing works.
False. Yes, exactly. Testing does work. All right, great job. I just want to quickly talk about testing in Visual Studio. So I think there's documentations online, but it might be difficult for people to follow along. So I'll just say this. So number one thing that you're going to do is that you're going to go to the extension and you're going to install the test runner extension, which is the extension for Java. So once you do that, this testing bit shows up. And you can do this by, if it doesn't show up immediately, you can quit Visual Studio and then come back to it. When this thing shows up, it will create this library, essentially. And in this library, it has all the things that it needs to run a test. And then once you have this, you can create a new class like test person or test salt grain. And the important thing is that you definitely need to import JUnit, and you need to create a new class with the same name as the file. And then you can run each test with this @test annotation, which kind of tells you that this is going to be a test. So if you're going to add a new test, you need to have another test annotation. And then, of course, it's just copy this. We'll talk about what void means. Copy this, and then this is just going to be a test name. So it can be whatever. It could be test equals salt grains. It could be whatever. Create your examples and whatnot, and this bubble should show up, and then you can run the test again. Does that all make sense?
Okay, yes it does. Makes perfect sense.
Perfect. Make sure that you run tests on your end, and let me know if you have questions or problems with running tests.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.